The Pennsylvania Liberty Alliance has been working for 5+ years for the goal of complete school property tax elimination. And it's recently delivered over 30,000 petitions to Governor Wolf and the General Assembly, signed by homeowners who wish to see the complete elimination of the school property tax. Mr. Boltz is also the former Vice President of the Pine Grove School Board, and he has traveled the state doing town halls, speaking at legislatures' events, and testifying at public hearings. Ron first became active in the property tax fight after having his property taxes tripled when he purchased his current home. This led him to getting involved in putting an end to the spot assessment practice that some schools engage in, and also the fight to completely eliminate the most unfair and regressive tax of all, the school property tax. So if you'll help me welcome Ron.
Thank you, Lynn, and thank you everybody for having me and for coming out to listen to me ramble here a little bit about this topic that's I'm very passionate about. Lynn, you talked about a poll. You were talking about your own internal poll from here in the Lehigh Republican side. I'm actually going to start off talking about 2 polls. My presentations usually would have poll after poll after poll, and I would overwhelm you with proof of I want this. But I have now been able to kind of narrow that down to one of the most important that took place in 2017, and that was a constitutional amendment vote that everybody that went to the polls to vote took, and this was the result. The question basically asked, do you want to increase the current homestead exclusion value to 100%? So most people, of course, interpreted that as school tax elimination, and here are the results. 56 of our 67 counties voted in the affirmative to do that. 83% voted yay, with an average vote split of about 60-40 in the counties that voted yes. Some were up over 80%. Monroe was at 83% yay. So there was another F&M poll, Franklin and Marshall, Terry Madonna, they back in August did another poll which pretty much backs up exactly what happened in that referendum. They found that 61% of Pennsylvanians would rather see a shift to more broad-based taxes to do away with the school property tax form of funding public education. So I'm here to basically talk to you about what's going on. I'm not going to talk about a specific bill. Normally I talk about SB 76 specifically, but I'm more here to give a little bit of an update about some other things that are on the table. You may or may not know that there has been a work group formed, a bicameral, bipartisan work group formed in Harrisburg, who were tasked with coming up with something that could pass the legislature to address the property tax issue. So of course the bills that are on the table, I'm not going to list them all because there's quite a few. These are just some of them that have been getting some attention recently, at least in this work group and in the media and other places. Of course 76, we're probably, everybody's mostly familiar with SB 76, the complete elimination of school property taxes for all businesses and residential properties, all properties, period. It would eliminate on a dollar-for-dollar basis. If your school has $25 million of property tax revenue now, if 76 were to pass, they would get that after the bill is passed. It would do so by increasing the personal income tax rate by 1.88 percentage points. It would bump the sales tax from the current 6 to 7, and it would apply the sales tax to more items and services that are currently not taxed. It's important to note that Pennsylvania probably has the narrowest sales tax base of any of the states in the country. We exempt many more items and services than most states do. So it would be part of the funding stream would be to apply the sales tax to those items and services. HB 13 is another bill that has recently come to everybody's attention. What this would do, this is another complete elimination bill. It would eliminate for all properties. But it would do things a little bit differently than 76. HB 13 would increase the PIT rate also by 1.85 percentage points, 1 percentage point increase in the sales tax from 6 to 7, and there would be an expansion to food and clothing only, but it would not be a 7% sales tax, it would be a 2% sales tax on those expanded items. And it would also, the most controversial part of it to date, it would also introduce the first ever retirement tax in the state of Pennsylvania to help eliminate the school property tax. And we can talk more about that in the Q&A if you wish, but obviously, for obvious reasons, that has become one of the biggest roadblocks to HB 13. HB 13 also does not deliver a dollar for dollar school property tax elimination to the schools. It does things a little bit differently. Some of the money, the PIT stays locally under HB 13 and would go directly to your school. It would be basically a local income tax increase. And the sales tax revenue would go to Harrisburg, but then it would go back to your county, and then the county would deliver it back to the schools on a per pupil basis, not a dollar for dollar, or not under whatever your school gets currently with property tax revenue. This is kind of an effort to do away, or at least to get away from the current hold harmless. If you're familiar with that, it's been pretty problematic, and it's trying to gear school funding more towards like a student population-based type of funding. Now, I have not seen an analysis of the 500 districts, so I can't answer the question as to what schools will get what. Some will probably get more than they need to eliminate their property taxes. Others will probably get less, but regardless, the property tax will be eliminated under HB 13. Jay Costa has a bill that would have been a flat $2,090 reduction for everybody. It did this by, or would do this by a 0.88 percentage point increase in the PIT and a 0.6% increase in the SUT. Now everybody would get the same reduction, the same flat $2,090, whether your property taxes are that high or not. There's a whole litany of senior-only proposals out there. We have reductions, we have freezes, we have relief, you name it. There's a senior proposal out there that would only apply to our senior citizens. Most of them are means tested. One of the most recent is by Senator Brewster. There's actually not a bill yet. He released a co-sponsorship memo. Senator Brewster's bill would be a 25% reduction for seniors over the age of 25, and you must have been in your current home for at least the past 10 years in order to get this reduction. Now, seniors only, 75. No, 25% reduction. 25% reduction wouldn't be an elimination for 75 years and older, and you have to be in your home for 10 years, at least 10 years. Are we clear now? Mm-hmm. Sorry if I screwed that up for you. Interestingly enough, Senator Brewster is a Democrat from, I think, Allegheny County. His co-sponsorship memo says right in it, we just need to spend more money on schools before we go any further with property taxes. So, as far as I'm concerned, he's doing this for political purposes, but that's an opinion. I cannot prove that. SB 923, Senator Mastriano, he has a senior-only bill. It would supposedly eliminate property taxes for 65 years and older. And once again, you have to have been in your home for at least 10 years, and it would apply to anybody making under $40,000 in retirement. If you make over that, $40,001, you do not qualify. He claims it would be paid for by gaming and lottery. I'm personally pretty skeptical that you can fund this by using gaming and lottery, but in full disclosure, I have not seen any kind of IFO report or any type of analysis on his bill. I'm just letting you know that it's out there. Representative Kaczynski, the Liberty Alliance was up in his district for quite some time, knocking on doors, giving him all kinds of headaches, and his response was to come up with a bill of his own. His bill would be an $800 rebate to property owners and a $50 rebate to renters. He does so by increasing the income tax by 0.42 percentage points, and also a sales tax expansion to what he calls luxury items. This bill, I haven't actually seen it, I don't think it exists yet. All I'm going off of is a co-sponsorship memo. But it's interesting to note that everybody gets a flat $800 rebate under this plan. We always hear about SB 76 supposedly creating winners and losers, and some pay more, some pay less. I'm going to address that here in a minute. But yet, some of these representatives have no problem taxing all of us, but then giving us back the same amount. So some of us with higher, we're going to be paying more than $800 in new taxes, but everybody gets the same relief back under his plan, regardless of how much extra you actually pay in the replacement taxes. So that, to me, is another layer of winners and losers, for sure. HB 504 of 2015, I'm told, is another bill that's been getting attention in this work group. This bill would have increased the PIT by 0.63 percentage points, and and a 1% increase in the sales tax. And it would shed this money into two different accounts. The PIT money would go into what they call a millage reduction account in Harrisburg, and the SUT would go towards the current homestead farmstead exclusion that I know you all know and love, because it's not really lived up to any of its promises so far. Most of us get little to nothing on the homestead farmstead that was supposed to deliver school property tax elimination. If only we legalized gambling, right? That was the carrot that was dangled out there to get everybody to bite. So this would put more money into that, and also the PIT would go into this quote-unquote millage reduction account. The problem here is neither of these two are distributed back evenly or equitably. The PIT millage rate account would be dictated by the Department of Education. They would send that money to the school, and they would tell the school what they must reduce their millage rate by. So every school would have a different millage rate reduction, and of course every homeowner would get a different amount in their homestead. The bill introduces no new spending controls. In fact, it actually says in the bill that schools can raise taxes because it does not eliminate the property tax. It can go forward and raise property taxes up to the amount of relief it can get. So basically they could totally wipe out your relief just by increasing the property taxes. You're right back to square one, and now you have these other taxes to pay on top. So I can't stand here and tell anybody here what their reduction would be under 504. It would be different for everybody. But what I can tell you is that a 0.63% increase in the PIT would probably bring in roughly $2.8 billion. That's what that would raise. And the 1% SUT in a good year would probably raise maybe $2 billion. So we're talking about $4.8 billion total. So if we do the math here, it takes about $15 billion to completely eliminate, so we're not even at a third of total elimination. So again, I can't tell everybody what they would get specifically. Some might get more than a third, some are definitely going to get less, but on average you're looking at about a third of what's needed to completely eliminate. So that's all that bill would deliver. There are multiple, what they call homestead-only proposals. Since that passed, that constitutional amendment that I showed you earlier, in theory, we can now bypass the uniformity clause and completely eliminate for homes only. And I say in theory because I have a lot of questions about whether or not it can actually be done, and there's some debate as to whether or not the schools would have to accept it or it could be forced on the schools by the legislature. But for now, let's assume that it can be done. There's a whole bunch of them out there. Some of them use an increase of PIT, some SUT, some both. And it would be for the purpose of eliminating for primary residences and farmsteads only. Commercial property taxes, business property taxes would stay in place. Now, this would require significantly less revenue than any of the complete elimination proposals. Obviously, it would require about $8 billion to do this, roughly speaking, according to the IFO. Versus the $15 billion plus or minus for complete elimination. So that's something to keep in mind. So why do we say the property tax needs to be eliminated? Well, the obvious reason is your high tax bills, and I'll have to explain that. School districts and Harrisburg are responsible for your high school property taxes. Please do not let any of your state legislators tell you that it's not their fault that your property taxes keep going up and up. That is a lie. Harrisburg does send unfunded mandates down to the school. They say you must do X, Y, and Z. However, you must come up with the money locally, and that's one of the reasons your school property taxes increase. And the pension issue is probably the biggest unfunded mandate. The state pays currently for about half of that, but you pay for it, with your increased property tax. The schools did not cause the problem. I'm not defending schools, believe me. There's a lot of blame to go around when it comes to high property taxes. I'm not letting them off the hook. I'm simply saying that Harrisburg, when they tell you, well, we're not responsible for increasing your property taxes, that is an outright lie. They absolutely are. Highly unfair, everybody pays a different rate, is another reason we need to eliminate it. We take our school property tax bills, reflected as a percentage of our income. Everybody in this room pays a different rate. I met a woman in Monroe County, single mother, making $50,000 a year, paying $7,000 in school property taxes. 14% of her income towards school property taxes. That's why you see Monroe County leading the way with an 83% approval on this referendum. I got a frantic phone call from a woman in Lancaster County. She's a retired, well, she's not retired. She was retired from her previous job, working now again. After the countywide reassessment that took place there, she is now paying 25% of her income towards her property taxes. And was frantic because she tells me she can't keep this up. She was asking me, you know, please tell me that the legislature is going to do something about this soon. And unfortunately, I could not lie to her and tell her, yeah, it's right around the corner. I had to tell her, well, you know, I wouldn't plan on the legislature doing anything at this point. You need to take care of yourself, unfortunately. To take phone calls like that, and Lynn and John have gone door to door with the Liberty Alliance, to see tears streaming down the faces of a lot of our seniors, and not just seniors, working people too, who just can't keep up. They don't want to move, but they have to. That's probably the biggest reason why we need to eliminate it. These reduction schemes that I talked about, I call them schemes, they're not going to work. For the reasons already mentioned, you know, we're going to increase taxes elsewhere, but we don't eliminate the property tax, so it just keeps climbing at the rate of more than twice the rate of inflation. And pretty soon, we're right back to where we were, and now we have these other taxes to pay on top of it. Promises aren't kept. We saw the gambling revenue promise that amounted to basically nothing. Countywide reassessments, some legislators will tell you, well, that's the solution to the problem. We just need more frequent countywide reassessments. I can tell you firsthand, we've done multiple studies on the most recent counties that have been court-ordered to do reassessments. And to make a long story short, we can show you in real data with real examples that the assessments prior to the countywide reassessment aren't any more out of whack than the assessments after. So basically what I'm saying is the county spend millions of dollars to do a countywide reassessment, and the assessed values afterwards are just as far off. All we're doing is kind of changing the chairs on the Titanic and shifting everything around, and we're right back to the same problem. All kinds of assessment appeals, and it's just a disaster. Countywide reassessments do not fix the issue, and of course, they don't fix the inherent unfairness and regressivity of the property tax either. We currently have no true spending controls. Act 1, that was where the gambling revenue thing came from, was supposed to enact real spending controls. I'm not going to go into all the details, but you see the results. I don't think we can say that we have any true spending controls as a result of Act 1. We also have no voter approval of either tax increases or school budgets in Pennsylvania. Lots of states have one or the other. I don't know if any have both, but some states will require a voter approval at referendum for a tax increase or a school budget. We don't have that in Pennsylvania. We can certainly use it. And there's no sign of property taxes slowing down, increases slowing down. The IFO is predicting about $550 million annually in increases to the property taxes, which is outpacing inflation by a wide margin. So if we don't change course, we can just look forward to ever-increasing property taxes. It's just going to keep going and going and going. If we do a reduction scheme, it's going to be temporary at best. And with these huge increases and no spending controls in place, we're going to find ourselves right back in the same situation, only worse, down the road. So what do we need to do? We need to eliminate it for a couple different reasons. The two biggest reasons, well, the first reason is nobody should lose their home to a tax. Everybody should own their home, not the school district, not the government. But beyond that, I believe we need to start treating all taxpayers the same. So if we eliminate the property tax, replace that with broad-based taxes like a PIT or an SUT, everybody now in this room, rather than paying a different rate of your income towards funding public education, everybody here is on the same playing field. In the case of 76, it would be 1.88% of your income, and you would pay some increase in sales tax when you go and purchase things. Everybody, no matter where you live, no matter what school district, your burden of funding public education is now the same as everybody else. No more being taxed on zip code or what school district you live in, or how much your school gets from state revenue, how much it doesn't, and on and on and on. But also, and I believe equally important, is we need to restore accountability to Harrisburg. I've heard time and time again from legislators and lobby groups that before we eliminate the school property tax, we need to get costs under control, because otherwise we're going to be, right back in the same boat again. It's going to be a mess. We need spending and cost controls. I say exactly the opposite is what has to happen. In order to get the cost controls, in my opinion, we need to eliminate the property tax, because the property tax is what enables your schools and Harrisburg to spend the way that they've been spending up until now. Harrisburg sending that pension down to you at the local level for you to pay with your property taxes. What incentive do they really have when they can just pass that buck to you? What incentive do they have to change prevailing wage? what incentive do they have to rein in maybe or take another look at some of the special ed mandates? Now, I'm not saying that maybe the mandates aren't valid or justified, but we're not even talking about it. So Harrisburg gets to send all this stuff down to you to pay for with your property taxes, and they get to avoid accountability because everybody gets mad at the school, not Harrisburg. So I believe to make them take these things seriously, we need to put it right back on their level. Why hasn't anything been done up until now? Well, we hear a lot of the excuses. We hear these things like, we're going to lose local control if we get rid of the property tax. We hear it's going to create new winners and losers. I don't think we should eliminate for businesses. And I would tell you that after years of doing this, these things they're not only excuses, but in most cases, the legislators telling you these things, they don't even believe these things themselves. And I'll give you a quick example. This homestead vote that we have right here, previous to this vote taking place, mostly the Democrats, but some Republicans also, but mostly the Democrats would say, you know, I support elimination for just homes, but because of the uniformity clause, we can't do that. I just don't think it's right to eliminate the property taxes for businesses. You know, I'm not going to eliminate Walmart's property taxes, you know, and so they go out there and they hoorah over this. We're not going to eliminate property taxes for commercial properties. Well, guess what? Now we have this homestead auction where we can do what they said they would like to do, and not a single one of them will even come touch this with a 10-foot pole. Every one of them is running away from any one of these homestead auctions. So do not believe that these excuses are legitimate excuses that they're telling you. I believe it's just a way of again, making excuses. The reason it's not done yet is also not because it can't be done. A lot of legislators will tell you, well, we can't do this. We just can't come up with $15 billion in revenue. This is simply not true. It's a math problem, folks. You have $15 billion and you come up with it somewhere else. It's really that doggone simple. And even the PASBO representative of one of the town halls I did in New York recently made the mistake of saying on camera, well, replacing it is easy. And then he kind of caught himself and realized what he said. But he went on to basically say, well, you know, we can do it. We can come up with the money. But, and then he went on to all the reasons why, you know, he supposedly can't. The other reason is not because other revenue sources are too, quote unquote, unstable. You're going to hear this a lot. Well, we can't eliminate the property tax because it's a stable source of revenue for our schools, and the SUT and the PIT, they fluctuate with the economy, not stable enough. Well, this is complete nonsense. The property tax, number one, is not stable. It's dependable. It's dependable if you're a school district that can just keep raising it every time they need to, but it's not stable. And proof that it's not stable is every time, let's say a hospital changes to nonprofit status and the school loses $1 million or $2 million in revenue, guess who makes that up? Everybody else with increased taxes. Just the fact that your school property tax rates are increasing for a lot of you on an annual basis proves that the property tax is not stable. It may be dependable for the school district, but it's not stable for you, otherwise it wouldn't keep going up. Now let's compare that to the SUT and the PIT. Does everybody realize that the personal income tax in Pennsylvania has only been risen one time in the past 25 years? Once. That's it. The SUT has been 6% since 1968. Does anybody here think the state's had any problem spending more and more money using most of those two revenue sources every year in the state budget? Absolutely not, because the PIT grows naturally. As income goes up, the same rate delivers more revenue to the coffers. As prices go up on items and services, the SUT does exactly the same. In fact, the time spent in the black far outweighs the time spent in the red, where during economic downturns, you might actually see less revenue. And I don't say that just as my opinion. There's actually been an IFO report on that, and I'll show you the graph. You probably can't see that in the back. But this is an IFO report issued to Representative Kaczynski. And this shows annual growth rates, and it has property taxes, and it has income taxes and sales and use. And you see these zigzag lines, and Representative Kaczynski said, see, that's proof. They're too unstable, they're going up and down. Except what he didn't realize is that this is growth rates. This isn't revenue going up and down, it's growth rates. The only time revenue went down was below this yellow line for this little triangle right here. Everywhere on this chart, which represents from 2004 to 2019, revenue growth was up. We were seeing more and more. Even if the line's going down, it just means the growth rate decreased. Not revenue, just the growth rate. So clearly, this is a much better way to fund pretty much any type of government. And these two sources are clearly stable enough to fund our schools. In fact, at the end of this chart, it showed the personal income growth rate at an average of 3.4% over this time period, and school district property taxes at 3.5. It's almost the same. So it's not that this can't be done, and it's not that these two sources are too unstable to fund our schools. That's nonsense. The state budgets its entire budget this way. It always does. Every family in the state of Pennsylvania has to budget this same way. And you're going to tell me that the institutions that are teaching our children somehow do not have the ability to run their schools and make their budgets the same way every household does in the entire state and the way the entire state government does? If that's the case, we've got really big problems in our public school system. Let me touch back on two other things that I mentioned earlier, the local control and these other excuses that we're hearing, the winners and losers. I think I already went over the winners and losers thing. You know, eliminating the property tax would be fixing the winners and losers scenario, not creating one. We would all now be going to a level playing field. And the local control, in my opinion, is largely a myth. I served in the school board, and I can tell you thousands of pages of 1949 school code, to me, isn't local control. The Department of Education forcing Common Core on our school districts, not our school boards, and not even the legislature, unelected bureaucrats, forcing our curriculum on us, whether you agree with Common Core or not, that is not local control. Harrisburg telling us we must use prevailing wage, whether you agree with that or not, that is not local control, and certainly the pension obligation is not local control. We can't get out of it, folks, at the school board level. Harrisburg created the problem. They make us be in this pension system, and there's nothing your school board did wrong, or your teachers for that matter. That, folks, is not local control. So two main things main reasons that nothing has been done so far, in my opinion. The first is special interest opposition. There's a lot of it, and it's bipartisan. I'll name the two biggest, one from sort of each side of the ideological spectrum, if you will. The PSEA, of course, is the biggest opponent, the teachers union. So, unfortunately, too many lawmakers, most of them probably Democrats, but a lot of Republicans too, folks, are in the pocket of the teachers union. They fear them to death, and they do pretty much whatever the PSEA says on this issue. The Chamber of Commerce, believe it or not, and unfortunately, is also opposed, so they kind of control a lot of the Republican side as well. And of course, the sales tax expansion. As I mentioned earlier, we currently tax probably the least amount of items and services of any other state, and you would be amazed at how many lobby groups there are to keep it that way. If there's something that's currently untaxed, there's probably a lobby group up there in Harrisburg lobbying to make sure that a sales tax is not applied to their item or service. The second main reason I also touched on earlier is Harrisburg accountability. Harrisburg, if we eliminated the school property tax and funded schools from state level sources, they would have to now fund their own mandates. There would be no such thing as an unfunded mandate. Actually, there isn't now. It gets funded eventually. It just gets funded by you guys with your home school property taxes. But now Harrisburg will be accountable for coming up with the revenue to fund their own initiatives like the pension and so forth. They want no parts of that. Could no longer blame the local school boards. In fact, I will tell you, referring back to something else I mentioned earlier too, I had one very honest conversation with a Democrat lawmaker, and I won't tell you his name because it was a very honest conversation. I would never do that, and I actually appreciated the conversation. But he told me directly, he said, you know, the Democrat Party is the party that puts itself out there as the representative and supporter of public education and our teachers. That's what we pride ourselves on. That's what we say. That's what we run on. We all know that that's largely true. And he went on to say, but if we could have a bill that actually increased taxes automatically every year that we didn't have to vote on, my members would probably support school property tax elimination. But if they actually have to vote on it, if they actually have to be responsible for funding the schools because they know that the current property tax system is rising, you know, at a rate of over twice the rate of inflation, they actually have to be accountable for that. They don't want any parts of that, because now they're going to be stuck between you guys yelling at them about ridiculously high tax increases or, you know, not funding public education properly. So it's a very honest conversation. I thought it was one that I'd like to share with you. That's what I mean by returning accountability to Harrisburg, not as being one of the biggest reasons why Harrisburg opposes this legislation. It's not for most of these other reasons that you hear the excuse made. Another thing is, I found out, unfortunately, that Harrisburg considers state level tax revenue to be theirs, not yours, not the schools. It's theirs to be used for their state budget purposes, the benevolent state budget. So if they look at you taking away some of these sales tax, you see, it'll be very easy for Harrisburg to raise revenue by starting to chip away at some of these sales tax items that aren't currently taxed. So we need a little more revenue. Let's just apply the sales tax to maybe a dozen things this year. People will hardly notice, and you'll go to the register, and now you'll pay sales tax on it, and the state gets the money. Under these elimination plans, we would be using those sources to give right back to you in the form of property tax elimination. Harrisburg wants to use that because they view it as theirs for their budget, and the same with the personal income tax. So those are the three biggest reasons why you see this effort not moving. I know I get asked all the time, this seems like common sense, this can work, you guys have shown that it can work. We got IFO report after IFO report saying most people would pay less, and I can prove that to you too if you would like to hear any of that. But you need to be aware, the bottom line is this can be done. Harrisburg's dragging its feet, and if you would like to see this done, especially as committee members, you need to get on your legislators, and please don't take, well, I co-sponsored it, as them actually fighting for it. We had a bunch of co-sponsors when we forced the vote in 2015 that voted against it. One particular co-sponsor I talked to on the phone. After that, it was a senator. I was on the way to a town hall in this legislator's district. She was not happy that we were going out there, and basically told me on the phone, I was told I'd never have to vote on this. So this particular legislator made videos, all kinds of things for her constituent. We need to eliminate the school property tax, and on, 76. Big supporter, except for the special interest lobby groups that supported her, and I would assume probably helped fund her campaign. They didn't want to see it. So in the end, the special interest lobby groups won her constituents. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you that every one of your legislators is a bum that's lying to you. I'm just saying be vigilant and don't necessarily believe everything you hear. And if they say they're co-sponsors, ask them, what are you doing to push it? Did you force a vote? What about a property tax caucus? I've been pushing this idea for years, trying to get somebody to form a property tax caucus that would then use their leverage, because we see Philadelphia doing it to us all the time to get more money routed to Philadelphia for their interests. Well, everybody seems to cave to Philadelphia because they vote in a large block. Why can't we get our property tax people to form a caucus and start holding leadership accountable, start telling Mike Turzai, look, you're not going to get what you want if we don't finally get what we want, because unfortunately Mike Turzai is an opponent also. Just telling you the way it is. In fact, he recently told me that any elimination plan will never make it by him as long as he's speaker. But if we had a property tax caucus, they can, you know, play a little bit of hardball. If they're willing to play a little hardball, a little less concerned about getting committee assignments and leadership roles, a little more concerned about delivering the promises that they made to you, then maybe we could actually bypass Turzai and get some things done. So with that, I'm going to conclude, and we will go to the Q&A. Yes, sir.
Ron, thank you for coming out and speaking to us tonight. Maybe you covered this, but could you explain the $15 billion, if we increase the personal income tax or the sales tax, what percentage of that increase have to be to make up $15 billion?
It depends on which bill you're talking about.
I'm just, take the bill away, you know, what's the math? What percentage in our income tax would it have to be increased?
Well, again, it depends on the bill, because different bills use different mixes of revenue. Like in 76, for example, the latest was a 1.88 percentage point increase. So you go from 3.07 currently to 4.9. Okay. Then there would be the 6 to 7% increase on the sales tax.
Okay.
And that would also be expanded to other items of service.
If we do those two increases, will that account for $15 billion?
It did account for a couple years back. There haven't been, to my knowledge, an IFO report run on those exact numbers within the past year or two. maybe you would know different if there has been, but that's roughly speaking.
Okay.
Yes, it would equal. Yeah, it was all IFO run and figures were all made when those. Basically, what the IFO does is they do their part, and then it goes to appropriations, and they come up with those tax rates. So actually, your Senator Brown, his appropriations committee, is who came up with those last round of tax rates.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes, sir.
Yeah, Ron, first, explain hold harmless quickly to people. If you lose your student enrollment, they can't cut your funding.
That's it.
And Philadelphia is the most egregious abuser because they're losing students left and right to charter schools for obvious reasons. Second, the sales tax was passed in the early 70s. I think it was 1 or 2% for the sole purpose of funding public education. So when Ron was talking about Harrisburg thinks it's their money, how much do you think of that goes to public education anymore? I would venture to guess zero.
Well, actually, believe it or not, I think most of it.
Oh, really? Okay.
That's one of the other concerns I hear all the time. Well, what if we do this and all those bums in Harrisburg, they're going to rate it and send it all to Philly, and then you go down to Philly and say, well, no, they're going to send it to all the rich districts because 76 is a dollar for dollar replacement. So now you're going to send all the money to these rich districts. Are spending 30 grand per student. We're only spending 10. And so no matter where you go, there's this fear of me not getting my share.
And last point, do you have any information? One of the Great Lakes states 10, 12 years ago or so, Wisconsin or Minnesota?
I think it was Michigan.
Michigan, they went through this process, and I haven't heard that their public education system.
What Michigan did was, there was a big fight, and the way I understand it, they passed a bill to eliminate the property tax, but it didn't have any funding behind it. It was just, we're just going to eliminate it, and you guys got to come up with the funding later. And so there was this big political battle, and I think it was I dare you to actually sign this, to the governor. I'm not sure what party was which at the time, but the one party sent it to the governor thinking he'd veto it, a political move. Lo and behold, the governor signs it, and now they eliminated their taxes with no replacement revenue. It turned out to be kind of a disaster. So that's why these bills specify, what the replacement revenue would be ahead of time. Although, as far as I'm concerned, I'm at the point now, I wouldn't care if we pass that. Let them come up with something, force the issue at this point. Yes, sir.
I'd like to hear your opinion on an issue that is important to me, and that's school district consolidation. Has that ever been looked at?
It's talked about a lot. This might surprise you, my position on that. York School District, one of the two districts in York, there was a study done, they were looking at consolidation, and at the end of the day, they discovered that it wouldn't save any money, and I actually believe it. In my particular district, I'm a rural district in Pine Grove, Schuylkill County, and when I was on the school board, busing at the time, it's not that long ago, it was costing us, I believe, $5,600 a day in busing because we have a large geographic area. And I was trying to wrap consolidation around my head with some of the neighboring districts. And there's a lot of questions that would have to be answered. How are we going to bus? Are we going to get rid of our current schools and build another facility somewhere centrally located? And how do you bus all these kids? And what's the cost going to be to ship them into one district? And if you don't do that, are we talking about a consolidated with just you're getting rid of some superintendents? Because yeah, superintendents, some of you may feel they're overpaid, some may think they're not. But let's say you're paying your superintendent, let's just say $200,000. In the grand scheme of things, I'm not saying that's anything to sneeze at, but to eliminate $200,000 out of a $50 million budget, you're not going to see any property tax, you're not going to see any tax reduction. So I don't know that consolidation is going to be a money saver. Maybe it could in certain situations. I'm sure it could in certain situations. But I don't think by and large, that it necessarily would. We used to have, I forget the figure, we used to have this memory. We actually are way down, believe it or not, with our current 500 districts than we were decades ago. There was a lot of consolidation done. I don't think anybody can say we've really saved any costs or not. Certainly something to look into, but then you get into the fights, well, we're the Cardinals and the next school district's the, I don't know, we'll say Trojans or whatever, so what's the new school going to be? Believe it or not, you get into really petty fights like that. What's the sports team going to be? Well, who are we going to play now? Because we're all the same district. You'd be surprised the roadblocks that are thrown up in the way the school consolidation.
Thanks for your comment. You're welcome.
Yeah, question is, has anybody ever calculated how much the counties would say that their level of assessment analysis is for all children?
No, but that's a good question. Because if you figure out, well, let's think about the cost of the property tax. One is the assessments, to run the assessment office, to handle appeals, to send out property tax bills from the schools, to chase delinquent taxes, to go to court to get those taxes, to file sheriff sales, to go out and do that. Not only is this system ridiculous and unfair and regressive, it's expensive to maintain. And that's just a good point. But no, actually I've never had time to actually put a dollar figure on that. It's a good point. Probably should.
Just to kind of sum up your presentations, when we leave here, we know what the current status is and what we can do. What is the current status of SB 7076 in terms of actually being brought up for a vote in the General Assembly? And also, what can we do in terms of other than just contacting our state representatives and telling them our position? How do you get them to take the action that we want?
Well, again, you as committee members can put a lot of pressure on your local representatives to do something. I will tell you this, the cold, hard, honest truth is, unfortunately, right now, I don't see SB 76 moving. The last time it was voted on in 2015, there was a lot of controversy over, we basically forced that vote, and that's not a popular thing to do, because now you're putting everybody on record, and by doing so, we exposed several co-sponsors who voted against it. So avoiding a vote like this is goal number one, unfortunately, of leadership, of legislators. So it's going to have to be forced. On the Senate side, last year, I believe, I'm already losing track of time, maybe a year and a half ago, Senator Arvold tried to force another vote on just a homestead version, and he got his head chopped off by leadership for doing so. On the House side, I'm just going to come right out and say it. This is probably not a popular thing to say. I'm sorry if I'm talking about a colleague this way, but as far as I'm concerned, Jim Cox isn't doing a damn thing on the House side to move this issue forward. It's just the way I see it. At least not the way I think it should be done. I think at this point we need a lot more aggression. We need a lot more people to stand up, again, form this caucus and say something has to be done, or else you're not getting our votes on other things that the leadership, that's on the leadership's wish list. So I wish I had better news for you, but I don't believe until it's forced, you're going to see a vote anytime soon. Right now, maybe you have a follow-up, but right now with this work group, elimination, from what I understand, has not been supported. Basically, let me back up. This work group was formed in an effort, I think I mentioned earlier, to come to some kind of conclusion on a bill, to form some consensus that can pass both chambers on the property tax issue. Even just this work group won't agree on elimination as being the answer. And from what I'm told, this work group won't even consider a homestead-only elimination plan, which seems to be probably the most logical compromise. If you're going to be on one side or the other, would be, well, at least let's eliminate for homes that don't generate money. Can't even come to a consensus on that. So now we're talking reductions plans, senior-only plans that may or may not result in anything significant for seniors. Most of it will be means tested anyway, so not every senior will get anything, even if they do pass that. And also these 504 like reduction plans. Okay, five more minutes and we got to wrap it up.
Yeah, and just as a practical matter, is it the political parties or the people in the committee positions or the General Assembly leadership positions, or is it special interest applying pressure to the people to not bring this up?
I think it's all of the above. I think the entire opposition is probably 90% political and maybe 10%.
Just looking at this from a political problems standpoint, how do you approach the individual political problems and compromise? You have to have people willing, obviously, to compromise. But if you figure out what they really want and can find out who's the obstacle, to apply pressure to those pressure points to be able to get the bill at least up for a vote. I like to see politicians actually be held accountable for voting on legislation. I don't care which party they are, but if people are clamoring for this at a significant level, then why can't we have another vote? That's 4 years ago, and this is the #1 talked about issue statewide.
It still is.
Then somebody in leadership in Harrisburg is failing, in my view, because it only gets to the governor if it passes both houses. This is the General Assembly. So you can't blame the governor unless he's holding something over somebody in a caucus. So where are the real pressure points other than our own elected representatives that we can apply pressure statewide?
It boils down to, in my opinion, until these legislators fear not getting reelected off of this issue, they're not going to put their name out. They're not going to be overly anxious to take a vote on it, because time and time and time again, I watched the most persuasive legislator tell me, I'm for you, I'm behind you, Ron, we're 100%, and then they're not, because of mostly special interest opposition. Now, I'm not saying nobody has a valid ideological argument against this. I'm just saying that most of those ideological arguments are probably never explored. They don't give you the time to work through them. And you mentioned what can we find as the sticking points? Well, we've been doing that for 10 years now, trying to appease and accommodate and ask, well, what's your real opposition? In fact, I'll close with this, the retirement tax in HB 13 that everybody is up in arms about. I can tell you firsthand that I sat in legislators' offices behind closed doors, and legislators themselves have told me very honestly, I will not support 76 because I think it gives too much of a break to seniors. Because they say it would shift too much of the burden. Seniors pay about $4 billion of the $15 billion shift. So their argument behind closed doors, honestly and candidly, is I believe that gives them too much of a break. We're shifting too much of that to the working families. We're already losing working families in the state. We just can't do that. If there were a retirement tax, however, I would support it. So Frank Ryan goes and introduces it, and he can't get one single damn legislator to stand next to him in his press conference. They all run and hide because they know it's the third rail of politics in Pennsylvania. So I hope I'm explaining to you the problem. We're trying to address these quote-unquote issues these legislators have, then you go and address them, and they don't support it anyway. We have this homestead option now that you would think would appease all these people to say, well, I don't want to eliminate for businesses. Well, now they have the opportunity, and none of them are anywhere to be found to support.
Whack-a-mole.
Can I just ask one quick question? I'm assuming you're from Schuylkill County. You're familiar with what I refer to as reverse appeals?
Oh, yes, that's what got me started in all of this.
Well,
it happened to me.
Then you understand it explicitly. It's exceedingly unfair. I would think unconstitutional with the law, the obscure law that supports it. I went to see Arnold, and he kept telling me every time I see him, he said, "Oh, we're going to eliminate school tax. That's what we're at." And he never did anything about this.
Nope.
And is there any, since this issue doesn't seem to be getting any traction, it's not going anywhere, can we at least address getting rid of the reverse appeal?
Well, I helped to write legislation for exactly that after it happened to me, and my taxes were tripled. I bought my home, and since the county, I don't want to get into too much of the details, but there's a thing called the common level ratio and coefficient dispersion, and I'm not going to bore you with it. The end result is I buy my house, and my taxes are tripled. Meanwhile, equal value properties are paying a third of what I'm paying because the latest countywide reassessment in my county was 96.
You were lucky. There's some that are 5 to 10.
There's some that are more than that, there's some that are worse than me. So I go and I start looking into this, educate myself, and I write a bill with Dave to not only eliminate the practice, but also give people that got caught up with it a pathway to relief. They would be able to, go back. And to make a long story short, we fought and fought and fought and fought, finally got it through the Senate, got it over to the House. Corbett was the governor at the time. A previous effort had already been vetoed by Rendell twice by a different legislator. And now we have this third option that I helped to write. It's over in the House. They have to vote on things 3 times, 3 considerations before it passes. If it passes the House, it's on the way to the governor for signature. It passes once, it passes twice, it's on the calendar to be brought up for the 3rd time, and Mr. Mike Terzai pulled from the county. Wouldn't let us see 3rd consideration. That's what happened. That's the truth.
I thought Pat Brown sort of vetoed it by taking the commercial out of it.
No, Pat insisted on a threshold. He basically said, well, instead of stopping the practice altogether, let's put a $10,000 threshold in. So if they would reverse appeal a property and it would generate $10,000 or more in revenue, the school could go ahead doing it. That was his way to try to continue to allow it on commercial properties, but make it so the schools couldn't really do it on residential. Because
So
most
unfair to
residential
you and I,
wouldn't-
isn't it also unfair to the commercial guys?
It is. Absolutely it is. And he insisted on that threshold being in. Meanwhile, on the house side, Benninghoff insisted that it not be in. So it was amazing that it even got through the House. The only reason it got through the House was somebody did an amendment, I think a floor amendment, to put the threshold back in, bypassing Benninghoff and some of the leadership in the House, which was the watered down version of the bill, but at least it would have saved a bunch of homeowners.
Yeah.
And like I said, it went through 2 considerations and passed pretty overwhelmingly, I believe. And turns out I would let it be brought up for the last vote.
Is there any hope for that?
There was recently talk about running that again, but I'm told from Dave Bargle that the governor had already weighed in and said that he'd veto it, and therefore it may never see a vote because they say it's a waste of time to do it, it's going to get vetoed. I say nonsense, let's put them on record.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
That we did invite all of the legislators and Ryan is here. So we heard all of this, and I don't know if you have anything that you wanted to comment on, or we could just reach out to you.
So they've started this work group, as was mentioned. They're contemplating all of those different things that were laid out, all the different pieces of legislation. Now, I would say, like was mentioned, 76 just unfortunately does not have the support right now. I mean, myself and somewhere in the ballpark, I forget the exact number from 2015, but roughly 50 or so members voted for it. So you're pretty far off from where you need to be of getting 102 votes to get it through the House. And so the different, I look at the different proposals that are being contemplated in that work group of total elimination of homesteads, farmsteads, and businesses. That's what 76 is, that's what I voted for in the past. But without the support for that, the next step down is because of that referendum that was passed overwhelmingly across the state in almost all the counties. I forget how many were out, but a small number were out. That is the next level down, in my opinion, just going for homestead and farmstead elimination. It's also a much smaller number of tax revenue that you need to replace through an increase in the sales tax and the income tax. So I think it's more attainable that way as well. And so that would be the next step down. And then you get to the things that are, in my opinion, not a solution. They're band-aids that are being put on the problem of partial shifts and reduction, etc. And I actually voted against one of those that came up in the past because it didn't have the protections that we're talking about. If you do a partial shift where they reduce your property taxes but they increase your sales and income, but there's no control on future increases to your sales tax or your property tax, what's to say they're not just going to have the higher sales and higher income and all of a sudden over time your property taxes aren't going to go up. So we had an amendment that would have put in place a mandatory vote to raise your property taxes in the future. That got voted down and I said, well, without that, then I can't be for it. I mean, that's not something I think we voted for. So I ultimately voted against that bill. So those are the different levels that are out there. I think I would like to see us zero in. I'm not a member of that work group. The two people from our area are Jim Cox is from Berks County and Marsha Hahn is from Northampton County. There are two local members that are on that work group, and so hopefully they're going to come up with a new proposal here. Their timeline is by the end of the year, and we'll see where that comes out. It's my understanding that we haven't heard a lot from that work group. They're being keeping information rather close to the vest, but it seems like the House Republicans and Senate Republicans are both on board with changes. Even the Senate Democrats have been marginally open to changes, but the House Democrats have just been total opposition to anything, basically. They don't want to see any changes, so they seem to be the roadblock or a big roadblock in this group. So I don't have an answer. I do want to share one other thing that was just glossed over, and I think Joe Hilliard mentioned it or asked about it in his question as well, which makes this problem and has made it historically so hard to get the actual votes on. Lots of proposals are out there where the numbers work and it seems like good policy and you want to move forward with it. But it is this concept of hold harmless. And so that whole harmless provision is very problematic because it went into place back in the 90s. And what it said is, the basic premise of it is that a school district can't receive less funding than it got the year before from the state. And when you look at school districts' budgets, ballpark across the state, about 60% of the revenue comes from your local property taxes, about 40% comes from the state. So a very large portion comes from the state. But with that mix, if all of a sudden you're in a school district that has ever-increasing, rapidly increasing population growth, us here in the Lehigh Valley, Monroe, Carbon, down in Lancaster and York, even some of the Philadelphia Powder counties, and especially Berks County, where you have very rapid growth, but you're getting small increases either from the state or school districts, 2%, 3% a year, but your growth is very rapid. If all of a sudden you're seeing that the funding from the state is basically being held, again, small increases, but it's not keeping pace with the amount of growth in your area, all of a sudden on a per pupil basis, that's how you have to kind of calculate this, the money from the state is not keeping pace, and so the burden gets put on local property taxpayers. And so the inverse is true of that. So if you have declining population, which the center part of the state, lots of places out in western Pennsylvania have significantly declining population over the years, if you're getting the same amount of money because of this whole harmless, and you're not getting less because of the declines in population, on a per pupil basis, all of a sudden you're getting a lot more per pupil. So then what happens is all of a sudden the local property tax share, because they're getting more per pupil from the state every year, the amount that their local school districts pay is level or even sometimes going down. And so all of a sudden it becomes not a partisan divide, it becomes a regional geographic divide, where the people that are making out very well because of Hold Harmless, they say, no changes. Why would we change? We're making out like bandits because of this error or problem in the formula from the 90s. So they don't want to make a change. And you have lots of people, even Republicans across the state, who just say, well, why would I vote against the best interest of my constituents and have them pay more in sales and income tax than they're paying in their property taxes right now. But for us here in the Lehigh Valley and all those other growth areas, we're the big losers on this formula because of the Hold Harmless. So one of the changes that we made since I've been in office that is good is that we have changed the basic education funding formula. It was put into place, and the biggest variable in that is the number of students in a school district. And so as your population changes, the only amount that we could get that to apply to was for new dollars that go in every year from the state. So while there are 12 to $15 billion that go for local property taxes across the state, only about $200 million increases every year since that went into effect 2 or 3 years ago are running through that new formula. So we need to shift more going through that formula. That would help relieve pressure on us here. It's not a total solution, but it would help relieve pressure on us here, and it'll start leveling out the amount that's going out per pupil from the state to all the different school districts across the state. Then, that's one part of the solution, and then the second is that I think we should start heading towards the total elimination of homestead and farmstead. That's overwhelmingly what people voted for across the state, and I think we need to respect the will of the people and head in that direction. So I've let the members of the work group from our caucus know that that's the direction I think they should be heading. Total homestead, farmstead elimination, making sure that there are protections in place for increases if there are going to be, then you're not eliminating for businesses. So making sure that there is some kind of protection of future property tax increases put on school districts, things like that. Other things that were mentioned about mandates, we've had different bills in the past that have been supporters of to let local school districts opt out from mandates. Unfortunately, that didn't pass. So I'm actually working on a new bill around mandates myself to try to alleviate some of that burden that we hear about. So, we're working on different pieces, but in lieu of the total 76 elimination, I think we do need to look for other solutions that can have the political support to actually get passed. So that's kind of where we're heading right now. And hopefully that work group will come up with a proposal by the end of the year as their combination.
Would you support this concept of coming up with a property tax caucus?
Yeah, so again, I'm the leader of our, there are lots of caucuses. I'm a member of it's the East Central Caucus. It's 18 members, and so again, we made that our #1 priority. So I'm already leading a caucus that has that as its top priority. I think if you created a property tax caucus, it's not a bad idea. I haven't joined it, but I think you're probably going to end up with the same 40 to 50 of us that actually voted for total elimination are going to be in that. And again, that hasn't gotten us there. So we need to figure out ways to actually broaden that group from just beyond the 40 to 50 people that actually, have voted for 76 in language in 76. We need to get beyond that. We need to get more people because until you get to 102, it's not getting passed. So, sure. It's a fine idea, but again, I'm already leading the caucus for the #1 issue is property taxes. So we got to figure out how to bring people on board with a new idea that either comes out of that work group, or if they don't come up with anything, we've already talked as a R18 that we need to put out our own proposal. So hopefully, again, that group was intended and formed to come up with something new, something different that can get to 102, and that's what we're counting on at this point. But if they don't, R18 is going to start working on something of our own. Basically, what it comes down to, we need to have a vote on something, in my opinion, because again, at least for us regionally, it's not sustainable. We have problems, but at the same time, we need a solution that is different in some way. We all know, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, hoping for a different result. We need to do something different to try to come up and break that block. And we don't have a solution yet, but we're going to keep working on it.
Okay, thanks everybody for allowing